the Medical AI Podcast.
Hello, I'm Dr. Felix Beacher, and this is the Medical AI Podcast, a 30-minute thrill ride of big ideas. We talk to a range of top guests, from industry innovators to scientists to philosophers. This is brought to you by Omdia and Informatech, where I'm the head of healthcare technology. Niels Bohr, the father of quantum physics, said, "Prediction is difficult, especially about the future." And I think this is true of medical AI. It is, after all, a very young field. You could say that commercial medical AI is only about 5 years old, in the sense that the first system approved by the FDA was done so in 2018. So, given all that, we are going to do something truly outrageous today. We're going to try and predict the future course of medical AI in the next 2 or 3 decades. And joining me for this Mission Impossible is Mircea Popa, CEO of Medicai. Mircea, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Felix. Thank you for having me.
So, could you please introduce yourself and explain a little about what Medicai does?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a second-time entrepreneur, I'd say. I have 10 years in digital health. First company is a skin cancer screening app based on AI. And my second company, the one I'm currently working on, is called Medicai. And we're more into the infrastructure part of things for medical imaging, but closely related to AI as well.
Okay, good. So, could you explain why you are in a position to talk about the future of medical AI?
I I spent a few years of my life trying to figure out how to develop an AI that can assess moles. So this was part of the work I've done at Skin Vision. And with Medicai, we're looking into developing AI algorithms, but we're looking more towards the how do you deploy these algorithms? What is the infrastructure needed for that? So how do you get data out of systems? How do you push them to an AI algorithm, and what do you do with the results? So I can say I have some experience with AI.
Okay, good. All right. So, look, it seems to me that 20, maybe even 30 years is a reasonable time frame for speculating about the future of medical AI. And my reasoning there is that we can imagine in the next 5, maybe 10 years, the kind of AI systems that are currently being developed will come online and will proliferate. But I want to be a little bit more ambitious than that in terms of the ideas, right? I want to push ourselves and think a little bit outside our comfort zone and think about 20 years, 30 years, maybe even, where things might look really quite different. So, what just speculate, can be as
Hmm.
wild as you like. What do you think healthcare looks like in the year 2050?
Um, so I think what we're currently seeing, and based on that, it's clear that medicine and science is evolving, and we're learning more and more. And I think so. One phenomenon is hyper specialization. So if you look at what's happened in the past with, for example, radiology, 100 years ago they invented the X-ray machine, and the X-rays were conducted by the surgeons at that time. And then you had a new discipline branching off, which was radiology. And then over time, radiology also split into radiation oncology. So how do you use radiology to treat patients, and then how do you use radiology to diagnose? And we now have other subspecialties, so to speak. And I think What's happening right now is we're seeing doctors really, really specializing, because as we understand more, there's more information to handle and treatments are getting more personalized. So I think that's one thing that we're going to have in 2050, let's say. Doctors and specialists that really know a narrow field, but they know it really, really well. That's on one hand. Um, on the other, I think the system's going to be a bit more decentralized, because if you have these specialists, you won't always have a specialist near your home, right? So unless you're a lucky one that has a neighbor who's the specialist you need for that exact condition, we're going to probably be working online more than we are today, because these specialists will need to work in teams. And of course, as I believe they're gonna work in teams, but also assisted by AI or something similar.
Right. Now, this question of specialization is very interesting, right? Let me just explore this a little bit with you. Now,
Mhm.
um, I can think of some AI medical applications that are very specialized indeed. Like, let's imagine bone fractures, and one of our former guests actually was developing systems for assessing bone fractures.
Mhm.
And you could even get more specialist than bone fractures. You can think about, I don't know, foot bone fractures, for example.
Yeah, or hand, which is
Yeah,
um,
right.
yeah,
Now,
complex.
so this seems like a kind of easy problem for AI, but we can think of a kind of more complex problem, and we can think of something like metabolic syndrome, right, which could involve things like obesity, diabetes,
Oh,
or
okay. Hmm.
insulin resistance, and it could affect circulation throughout the whole body. It could even affect the brain. It can affect the multiple systems. In fact, you could even it's probably more challenging to think about the kind of systems in the body it doesn't affect, right? Now, so my question is, do you think medical AI systems can handle that kind of complexity? Because it seems maybe to go against this notion of specialization.
Yeah, I think so, to be honest. So of course, it depends also on the quality of data. So, do you have the proper sensors? Do you get enough data to feed into the AI algorithm? But I say, yeah, definitely yes. And I think this is where AI shines. So, the question kind of becomes, how do you make a really, really small change? And how do you predict what that change will do to the overall system? Especially when you have a really complex system like the human body. And I think this is where AI really shines. And this is, yeah, I would say I really see AI doing that.
I guess another thing that occurs to me is that medicine is full of diagnostic categories
Mm.
which are much more vague and fluffy and poorly defined than probably most people imagine, right? And this is
Well,
particularly true, I suspect, in the field of my PhD, which is psychiatry. Now, I'll let me give you an example.
mm,
Schizophrenia may sound to the layman as though it's one disorder, and it's really
yeah,
not. It's a whole cluster of disorders, and there's a lot of debate and argument about whether certain types of schizophrenia, such as catatonic schizophrenia, are even anything to do with the other types of schizophrenia, such as paranoid schizophrenia, right? My
mm,
point is that sometimes our concepts for diagnostics is a complete mess. And I can imagine it's very difficult to develop AI systems in cases where we have this just conceptual mess for diagnostics. Do you see what I mean?
yeah, and it is. I totally see it, and it comes down to if you'd have the ability to go into the really, really tiny details, would one still equal one? I mean, would you be able to find two things that are completely equal? Because if you go low enough into the details, at one point two objects will differ. And the same reasoning goes for, we're calling a disease diabetes today, right? And but if you take into account all the details, all the personal details of the patients, I think what's going to happen in the future, we're going to start splitting them into subcategories and then go even further into, even lower subcategories. And medicine is already evolving towards a personalized, a completely personalized approach. So we see a future where we're going to give you a drug that only works for you with your condition, with your specific symptoms, specific causes, and this is only going to work for that individual. And I think we're gonna. I'm almost sure that by 2050 we'll be there. Psychiatry, to use your example, is just I don't believe for psychiatry we now have the proper sensors to collect the data, so to speak. So it's still kind of fuzzy.
Yeah.
And it's fuzzy also for the more traditional conditions, but it's evolving and it's happening so fast that I really believe that we're gonna have a drug that only works for your genes, for your
Yeah.
context.
Okay, look, to stay with psychiatry just for a moment, let's also
Mhm.
remind ourselves that it's very recent, maybe I'm just a few years since homosexuality was considered to be a psychiatric disorder and people were treated
Yeah,
for it, sometimes forcibly, right? Now, the
yeah,
idea of that is just horrifying now, but it's true. And it's just an example of how these kind of concepts in medicine can change so much. And this has nothing to do with science. And it's an area where one can imagine that, machine learning approaches to medicine, for example, are not necessarily going to progress at all, right? Because the concepts have to be straightened out first. And I'm not sure that we ever really get very, very clear progress on that. Maybe I'm a pessimist.
I think it kind of brings us to why it's difficult to develop AI. So, and psychiatry is probably a good example for this. First of all, you need quality data and access to the data. So, if your data isn't good enough, then you won't be able to train an AI that actually produces results. And I think that's because of the nature of psychiatry, we can't really we can't really measure what's happening in the brain, at
Yeah.
least not in the detail. So how do you get quality data? We're just everything that we're doing, and in psychiatry more than in medicine, but we can also think of medicine overall. It's still kind of based on second-hand observations, if I may call them so. So it's always, we do not observe, we are not witnesses to the actual phenomenon and what's happening there. We're just seeing really high-level effects of what's happening underneath. And this is progressing, of course, and we're getting better and better sensors, and we're getting better and better data. And now we have the mathematical models to feed that data in. But
Okay.
that's the challenge.
Okay. So could let's you mentioned precision medicine there, and that's an example we'll come on to in a minute. But maybe before we do, let's talk about data, because this is very much what Medicai is involved in, right? So can you talk about how you see the flow of data, medical data, being, changing to facilitate the development of machine learning models for medicine?
Yeah, so I believe the future, 5, 10 years from now, is we're going to have these automated imaging or diagnostic scanners, CT or MRIs, and they're going to be fully automated. And if we can automate those machines, I can imagine we're going to deploy them wherever. So we won't only have them in large cities, we're going to have them in villages or remote areas. And if you could, screen the population and lean more towards prevention rather than treatment, you would want to get these people every 6 months or 12 months into one of these machines where you could do a preventive scan and then have AI looking at those images just to raise warning flags. And then for the people that, the AI found something, we can imagine we're going to take that data and send it to a more specialized AI or a team of doctors that can make a decision. And we're going to, instead of having the system we have today, where we, let's face it, we're kind of, you also need to be a bit lucky because you never, you never have a specialist or the best specialist at hand. We're going to have a system where we're going to route the data in a smart way through the system. So I can imagine we would want to have the best route for that patient, depending on the patient's context. So, for example, if I have a patient that goes into a CT scan and we find something suspicious in the lungs, you probably want to send that data to the best possible team of pulmonologists, radiologists specialized in that condition, whatever that may be. And then they can come up with a treatment plan or the next steps for a certain diagnosis. And then just have the patient traveling when you know exactly what needs to happen with that patient. So this is kind of a future I can imagine will happen in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Now,
Sorry. Go on.
sorry, the problem is we need to think of a different infrastructure for this to be able to happen. We can automate the MRI machine, but right now we're handing these images out on CDs to patients. So how do you get the data through the cloud? How do you get it to the right people? How do you map the system, and how do you do it in a scalable way? Because we're not talking just about, about just one patient, but we're potentially talking about 1 million people. So this is kind of what we're thinking about at Medicai.
Okay, great. Let's just explore the example of something like atherosclerosis, right, which obviously is a major cause of death, certainly in Western countries.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can imagine a situation where we have exactly what you just described, right? We have a highly automated process for diagnostics where people maybe go for a scan once a year, and that kind of volume of scanning is possible because it's all automated. There are no radiologists involved, like looking at images is completely automated and done by algorithms. Now, that would work for diagnostics. However, what AI systems would not be able to tell us very much about, perhaps, is what to do about that diagnostic. And the reason is that, for example, if a doctor says to a patient, okay, look, we've discovered you've got atherosclerosis, you need to change your diet. And then the patient might say, okay, how do I do that then? And then the doctor kind of probably, if he's going to be truthful, will say, yeah, I don't really know, because epidemiological research on diet is extremely hard to do because it takes an awful lot of time and an awful lot of and so the solution, the diagnostics is kind of the easy part. The solutions certainly for diet might be very difficult, and that might be something where AI systems kind of struggle to.
Exactly. And for the sake of the discussion, we're oversimplifying it, because even that, I don't think this is going to be fully automated. I think it's going to be supervised by humans, and probably you have to, because it's, people have questions, patients have questions, and you as a patient probably you wouldn't enjoy going into an MRI machine. You'd see a red flag and then no feedback or no person to talk to. So I think it's always going to be supervised at a certain level, and the role of humans is going to be really, really important. Although I think it will change from what we're seeing today.
Okay, so now why don't we turn to the concept of precision medicine, because this is something that's talked about a lot and for good reason. Now, and let me just here bring in the example of my own, which is a couple of years ago, I started up a small research group of machine learning experts, and we developed a system for predicting whether a certain type of treatment for prostate cancer would work for you. It was kind of yes or no. And it was based on things like your symptom history, your age, your sex, your concomitant medications, a whole range, your bloods as well, a whole range of different types of data. Now, this is a really nice example of precision medicine, because all of those data, of course, vary between people and is used in the algorithm, which was giving the decision, yes, this will work, or no, it will not work. The problem that we had in turning this into a commercially viable proposition was that intellectual property is not possible to attain in Europe for software, right? So we couldn't have, it would have been difficult to make money out of it. Now, when you're trying to create something like that, it's very difficult to see all the way down the line, right? It's very difficult to be an expert in every single stage of the research and commercialization process. So I'm kind of wondering whether, I mean, there's a few things to say here. I mean, tell me, does any of that chime with your experience at Medicai?
It does. So I'm a big fan of democratization, and we really believe, we should, if we want to have innovation, we should at least give everybody a chance to try their hand at it, and of course do it in a safe way. But we should have more and more people working on this. And what you're describing is, the reason why mostly big companies are the ones to develop this type of products. And it's a shame because we're definitely missing out, but it's hard to measure, so we don't know what we're missing out on. I think it's what the problem with software protection. That's just so copywriting or protecting software IP is just a moat that you can build around the business to isolate it from competition. For example, we in the past we chose not to go for a patent because you run the risk of exposing the solution or the algorithm, and you need to describe what you've done. Also, I think there are other ways to protect products. I'm a big fan of network effects and economies of scale, and I think each AI sort of has an economy of scale embedded into it. So it becomes better and better as you give it more and more data. And this is what's going to make your product better than the competition's. Of course, there's a discussion here, and you're kind of working with the notion of thresholds. So one threshold that we see is your algorithm needs to be good enough to have a good business case. So, for example, if it's below 80%, maybe it doesn't make sense for a company or a customer to buy it because it's not accurate enough. And then you also have another threshold where usually these AIs or algorithms, they need to attain that threshold for them to be certified. So, and sometimes the order is the other way around. So maybe you have a 95% accuracy threshold for it to be certified, but it doesn't make sense business-wise until it's up to 99%. The problem becomes above the threshold, there might not be a difference in terms of maybe your algorithm will not sell better if it's 97% compared to the 95% that the competition attained. So in this sense, there are moats that you can build around these products. Copywriting is one of them, or protecting the IP, and there are others. But without getting a network effect or thinking of other ways of protecting the company, I don't think you're ever going to be fully protected, and that's a risk. That's the risk of doing business.
Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. Let's talk about something completely different, but also important, and that's culture. How do you think the culture of the health system and the medical profession needs to change? Do you think it's an issue or is it not an issue?
I think it's so. We're a startup, and I can talk about my experience. We are a startup, and when we started working with hospitals and doctors, there was this cultural clash in a sense because they're used to doing things at a really slow pace, where they want to make sure that everything's safe, and that's completely natural, especially in healthcare. There's this culture in startups where it's, they say break things fast. Well, you can't really do it in healthcare because it's not like in digital marketing. In digital marketing, if you break something fast, you just
Yeah.
decrease the conversion rate. in healthcare, if you decrease that conversion rate, it might be bad, really bad for a few people. So you can't do that. But I think we need if we want to bring innovation to the healthcare system, the two cultures need to meet halfway. So the traditional healthcare system, hospitals and doctors probably need to do things differently, a bit faster, and startups probably need to take into account that it's healthcare and it's not blockchain or digital marketing. The reason being, there needs to be middle ground because startups don't have only have 18 months to prove that they've made it to the next stage, whereas the healthcare system has probably 20 years, 30 years. So, someone put it, um, doctors may be undecided longer than your company may stay solvent.
Right. Yes. I mean, look, there's no law of nature, is there, that says that that innovations will definitely get translated into clinical practice. That
No,
might happen, it
yeah,
might not. And the thing is, probably there generally, when there's an innovation, there are winners and losers, and it is, of course, human nature to protect one's own interests. And so, how this this seems like a very difficult set of problems. It's kind of hard to unpick, but it's very important to think about.
yeah, yeah. Tell me about it. Um, True. So, I can't say I really have an answer for this. I don't think, I think nobody does. And maybe it comes down to finding a system or a design for the system where it's in everybody's best interest to bring in innovation. And of course, the innovation needs to work. We're talking about good innovation because you also might have bad innovation. Um, but if it's good and it helps people, I think that should be in the interest of all of us. Um, is it financial interest? I guess that's also a blocker. So
Yeah.
there are companies and usually these companies and systems are also adverse to risk, which is by definition what innovation is. They need to increase their appetite for risk, if you ask me. So you can't have innovation without a small degree of risk, but it
Right.
is risk.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk briefly about one other issue that's very important, and that is regulation. Now, um, regulation is, of course, one of the key things that will determine how fast or slow progress is in the next 20 or 30 years. And regulators are also in the position where they're trying to understand and regulate on things that they may not understand very well at all, right? Because the field is highly
Mhm.
technical and it's moving very fast. So, can you comment on that and how it relates to your own experience?
Yeah, I think it's so. I think regulation, for example, in Europe, if you look at GDPR, I think it slowed down a lot of research, to be honest. And but you could argue that we need it because there were companies or entities abusing the personal data of people. So I can see we need regulation. You don't want you don't want to buy any snake oil, right? And there will definitely be people selling that if we do not have these laws in place. On the other hand, I think we need to make sure that we have regulation that allows innovation. So again, the problem with startups is you only have 18 months to make it to the next stage. If a discussion or approval for a clinical study or for a startup to just get the data that they need to train an algorithm takes more than 12 months, I don't think that the problem will become that the regulations prevent the startup moving at a speed which is expected by their investors. And what's going to happen is those investors will move money away from healthcare and they'll move it towards other industries where the returns are bigger or faster. And that's a risk.
Yeah.
We need investment in healthcare. And we have these technologies. We know they're going to work. We just need to invest the right money, data, and time into them. And I think
Okay. All right.
I don't think that's going to happen. To be honest, what I'm seeing is I don't think that's going to happen through government. I think that needs to happen in the private sector.
Okay, all right. Well, look, let's circle back to where we started, and that is what is healthcare going to look like in 20,
Hmm.
maybe 30 years. Now, I get the impression that you're an optimist. I like to be an optimist as well, but I can see problems. So, just to
I
sort of
am.
sum up, I mean, so just sort of describe again what is how is healthcare going to be better in 20 or 30 years' time than it is now?
I think we're gonna have precise medicine. We're gonna have drugs that work for a specific individual. We're gonna know exactly what caused the condition and how to treat it. And I think we're gonna be able to diagnose conditions a lot earlier than we are today. Probably that will come packaged as wearables that people will have on them um, all the time or most of the day. We're going to have AI algorithms that look at the data, start predicting things, and will also alert the nearest healthcare facility. And these these will bring a lot of value. So I can imagine also we're gonna live longer and better. At the
Yeah.
same time, on the other side of the when you're gonna look at the doctors, I think they're gonna be super specialized. So you're gonna have really, doctors handling a really narrow niche, and also their role will also be slightly different. I think they're gonna be a bit more technical, being able to monitor the machines, make sure that they're working properly, and kind of collaborate with the AI and technology into to getting the best treatment course for their patients.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense to me because you can see the seeds of those kind of developments already kind of in the ground, as it were,
Mhm.
I think, right? Okay, good. Last question, Mircea, and that's something I ask to all the guests, and that is what is your favorite example of medical AI currently in practice that's got nothing to do with your own?
Yeah, I don't like taking science to be honest. Um, but a year ago I read about a team out of Ohio University, I believe. So they were using AI to repurpose drugs. So which is for me that's really really smart because as I mentioned, one of the most difficult stages in the go to market is how do you certify something? How do you run an AI or a drug through a clinical study? How do you go through the process with either the FDA or the European Union, go through the MDR? And that's really, really difficult. But if you have drugs that were already approved by these organisms and you could repurpose them, there is a huge library of drugs. There is a huge library of conditions that were, these are all ever growing, and if you could find a drug out of the existing library that could work better than existing treatments, that would be hugely valuable. The problem is the numbers are so big you couldn't do it manually. So they were using AI to do this, and I really like the idea, and it's really really smart. Can be used tomorrow, so it
Yeah.
doesn't have a long development cycle, and could show benefits next year.
It's a fantastic example. It's probably not going to be that popular with a lot of drug companies because they make their money out of the kind of range of time for which they have.
It
Um,
depends, I'd say. So, I mean, if you'd have this drug which you were using for a condition, and then someone came in and told you, hey, this would also be valuable for another condition, that means a bigger market.
that's true. Yes,
Right?
that's a nice point.
Well, yeah, I know. The other problem is what happens if that drug is already old and you don't need to develop a new one. But then I think this is where the government or authorities should take notice and come up with models that encourage this type of thinking rather than discouraging it through the
Yeah,
current regulations.
yeah. Okay, great. Look, Mircea, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and thank you very much. And come again when you've got something to report from Medical AI. That'd be great.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Okay, cheers, Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for listening. I'm Felix Beacher. Ping me on LinkedIn for more information on Omdia's services in healthcare technology. See you next time.